She started as a stand-up comic who found fame on the small screen, co-starring on the TV shows Candid Camera and the new Dick Van Dyke Show, and was a staple on 70s game shows including Tattle Tales and, of course, Match Game. She continues to do occasional film work and starred on Broadway in The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. But her greatest fame has come as an author. Her bestseller, Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Café, spent 36 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and became a hit film. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on Interviews, our conversation with comedian, actress, author, and Academy Award nominee, Fannie Flagg. Are your characters alive to you?
Yes, they are. And, you know, only because I think the world of you that I will tell you the truth. When I'm writing books, those characters start to talk to me. You know, I hear them talking, and of course my characters are basically a combination. Everybody says, well, is that based on this person or that person? And it really isn't. It's based on a combination of 4 or 5 people, and like most writers, some of yourself gets in it.
How many of them are actually you?
Exactly. The first book that I ever wrote, which is called Daisy Faye and the Miracle Man, it was about a little 11-year-old girl that was raised on the beach in Mississippi, and that was kind of everything in there was kind of true because I was raised on the beach, and my father did have a malt shop, and everything I wrote in there was basically kind of true. And this new book, I Still Dream About You, the main character, Maggie Fortenberry, is a 60-year-old gal who was a former Miss Alabama. Well, now, I know about, I would say 30 former Miss Alabamas. So it's a combination of all of these gals, you know, that I put into one.
But there also is a former Miss Alabama contestant sitting right in front of me.
Yes,
a
you're
multiple
right.
Miss Alabama contestant.
That's right, yes, it's true. I was in the Miss Alabama pageant for 7 years and never won. But now let me please explain myself so you don't think I'm an egomaniac. When I was growing up, this was in the early 60s. I was dyslexic, so I wasn't very smart in school. I couldn't get a scholarship, and there was a whole tradition in Alabama. Miss Alabama pageant was the biggest thing other than the Alabama football team. So when they had the junior Miss Alabama, and then you start at 16. So I went into the junior Miss Alabama at 16 to win a scholarship to school because I didn't have very much money. So they gave out scholarships, and that was the only way a girl back then could get a scholarship to school because they didn't have athletic scholarships or anything like that. So I went in the junior Miss Alabama pageant, wrote some silly sketch. I can't even remember what it was. I'm embarrassed to even think about it. And then I would get a scholarship to help me to go to school. And so each year I would go back in it and get a scholarship. I never intended. I mean, it wasn't my intention to win because I never could have won because you have to. Miss Alabama. I always get tickled. You know, people say, "Well, beauty queens are not very smart," but that particular pageant, you have to have like very good grades. It's the Miss America pageant. It's not Miss USA or whatever. So you had to have like all A average, and I certainly didn't have that. But I could never win. But I certainly was in it a lot.
When you talk, though, about education and going to school, and I know that your grandmother was a college graduate.
Yes.
Which I think is very interesting for the time she would have been in, that they would have valued that.
Yeah.
Now, your mom didn't go to school, didn't go to
My
college.
mother
correct?
was a child of the Depression, and a lot of kids in the Depression did not get to go. But my grandmother did. She went to Judson College in Alabama. And I don't think she finished. She met my grandfather there, who was teaching at the Marion Institute. But she did go to college, and you're right, it was very unusual at that time.
Was there a lot of emphasis put on education then in your home?
No, there really wasn't. I think because at a very early age, Ernie, my parents realized that there was something the matter with me. And when I say that, I mean they understood somehow. They were disappointed, but they understood that I was not going to excel in education because I was severely dyslexic and couldn't spell and couldn't do math. So I really struggled in school. So I think that they were kind enough not to pressure me. And I appreciate it to this day because they more or less let me go toward what I wanted to do, which was theater. And at a very early age, I got into theater when I was 15, local theater there in Birmingham. And I just sort of, I did go to the Pittsburgh Playhouse, which is a theater school, and I took a couple of semesters of acting at the University of Alabama. But as far as, a formal education, college education, I did graduate from high school, but that was a miracle.
Did you ever worry you were dumb, not understanding what the problem was?
I was horrified that I was dumb. I was embarrassed. And because I just, I could read, dyslexia affects people in different ways. I was a very good reader, but I couldn't spell and I couldn't do math, and I have a hard time knowing my left from my right. And so when I was in dancing school, I was asked to leave because they'd say, turn left, and I'd go the other way, turn right, or whatever. And to this day, I'm constantly lost. I'm lost everywhere because I can't figure things out. But it really affected me in that I thought that I was not as smart as everybody else.
So then why didn't you go and hide? What made you become Fannie Flagg?
That's a wonderful question. I think that I was so taken with entertainment, the plays and movies, that I wanted to be that, And I had a lot of encouragement. My father was a motion picture machine operator. And I think he always wanted to be in show business secretly, So he was very supportive of me being in the theater. And I had a wonderful mentor, James Hatcher, who was my director. And he was very supportive of me and pushed me and all of that. And why I didn't hide was not because of anything that I did. It was because I had just fabulous encouragement from people at the right time that said the right thing. Because when I can remember when I was in the 6th grade, I developed that. I started not speaking and hiding, and I would go to school, and I remember I would put my head down on the desk, and I had a wonderful 6th grade teacher, and she sort of made me sit up, and she said, you can't help that you can't spell and this and this. And so it was because I had people that encouraged me. And I think that I wanted to, I was affected by, my mother always said I saw too many movies.
Okay, then the next oddity, I think, in this little path of yours is, so you become a writer.
Yes. Shall I tell you the story?
Yes.
Well, I don't know why I always wanted to write. So when I was in the 5th grade, I just decided that I was going to write a play. Why? I can't remember why I thought I could, but that was before I knew how really dyslexic I was. So I wrote this play called The Whoopee Girls, and it was about, I was a career girl living in New York, and my apartment was above the Copacabana nightclub. Now, where I got that, I don't know. So I was going to Catholic school, and I did this play, and they put it on, and it was amazing. They put it on the 5th grade. Of course, I starred myself and my best friend, and it was funny, and the plot was silly because at that time, Harry Truman was president, and I thought Harry Truman was coming to visit me, and so I threw this huge party for Harry Truman, and of course, the end of the play was that Harry Truman was an insurance salesman. Oh, I thought that was hilarious, and that was okay, except during the play, I had my character drinking something like 32 martinis, which I must have seen in a movie, that I thought that was very sophisticated, to drink martinis. So the sister called my mother, and she said, my real name is Patricia Neal. And she said, Mrs. Neal, we thought the play was charming, but we're a little concerned about her relationship with alcohol. My mother said, oh, sister, she's seen too many movies. But I wanted to tell you later on how I came to find out that there was another thing that was the matter, because my name really was Patricia Neal, and I was known as Patsy. My mother called me Patsy, everybody called me Patsy. And I changed schools, and the sister called my mother to give a report on my progress, and she was talking to my mother, and she said, well, Mrs. Neal, Pasty does very well. She's a very sweet little girl, and Pasty does play well with others. And she went on, and my mother said, excuse me, sister. She said, her name is Patsy. And the sister said, well, she spells it Pasty. So we sort of started figuring out something was the matter. So that's what I would do, is invert my letters.
How did it become Fannie Flagg?
Okay. When I was 18, I think, I was going to do a professional play. And when you do that, you have to, by law, sign up with equity. Mm-hmm. Well, because my name was Patricia Neal, they said, you can't have that name. We have another actress who has that name before you. And I thought, oh, no, what will I do? I've got to come up with something silly. And my grandfather, who had worked in the theaters, vaudeville theaters in Birmingham, mm-hmm. he said, take the first name Fannie. He said, because during the 20s and whatever, a lot of comedians came through and they had that name. Mm-hmm. And I said, great. And then I couldn't come up with a last name, and I thought Fannie Brown, Fannie this, Fannie that. And a friend of mine called, named Mary Hurt, which is funny. Her name's funny anyhow. She called me and she said, Fannie, I have your last name. I said, what is it? She said, it's Fannie Flagg. I said, great. I've got about 5 minutes to call him. And I said, where'd you get that name? She said, well, it's Muriel Dooley's grandmother's name. Well, to this day, I don't know who Muriel Dooley is. But the point of it is...
But you got the name.
I got the name, and I thought... I was doing comedy at the time, because I was wanting to be a comedian, and I thought, well, it's a funny name, so people will laugh before I even come out, right? Mm-hmm. Never dreaming that one day I would grow up and want to be a serious writer. So I'm stuck with Fannie Flagg. So there you go.
I think a lot of people, when they think of you, they think of writer, mm-hmm. but then when they think of you, they also think of TV character, actress, all of that. And Candid Camera comes into it.
Yes.
But what a lot of people might not know is that you wrote for Candid Camera.
Yes, I did.
That's how...
I did.
How that happened.
And I'll tell you, I'm glad you asked me about that, because that came into play because I couldn't write this way. I was hired, I went to New York, and I wrote some material, and I had a friend type it out, and I sold it to a review in New York. You're too young to remember, but it's called The Upstairs at the Downstairs. And at the last minute, the young woman who was supposed to do the material I had written, because I went to New York wanting to be a writer, couldn't get out of another contract, and so they came to me and they said, can you do this? Because you know the material, you know it already. So I stepped into the show. Opening night, Alan Funt came, and he saw that I had written the material, and he asked me if I would come and be a writer. And I said, well, what does that entail? He said, well, you just sit in a room and throw out ideas. And I thought, that's not writing. So I became a so-called writer, but I really didn't write things down. Right. See, so that's what I really wanted to do. Well, then, Ernie, I wrote a thing, and the next a sketch about a woman who was, I think, was a truck driver or something. Back then, that was unusual. And again, the gal that was supposed to do the sketch didn't show up. So Alan said, you wrote it, so you go in there and do it. So what happened was, on my way to become a writer, I sort of fell into the acting. And did well with that, and I sort of got away for a while from what I really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then in 1975, I had been doing a lot of game shows and things like that, and I was getting sort of thinking, where is this going and all that. In 1975, I moved to Santa Barbara, California, and the first day I was there, I noticed on aren't you glad you asked? I noticed on a pole, and it said Eudora Welty, the famous Mississippi writer, short story writer, was coming to speak at the Writers' Conference. And I thought, I'd give anything in the world to hear her speak. So I went to the Writers' Conference, signed up for the whole, 4 days. And I went there. And I was so excited about being there, and I sat in an auditorium with all these, I just thought they were all, must have been professors and brilliant and all that, and they had their papers and everything. And the man came out and he said, welcome writers to the Writers' Conference. And he said, this year our short story contest, you have to have your story in 3 days. And I didn't know that was part of it. And he said, and we have a one-word theme, and that theme is childhood. And so I noticed everybody got out their pencil and they wrote childhood. And I got out my pencil and I think I wrote childhood. And so I thought, oh no, I've got to have this thing in or they won't let me come see Eudora Welty. So I ran down to the drugstore and I bought one of those little spiral notebooks, So I thought, childhood. And so I started writing as this little 11-year-old little girl, and I thought, if I make mistakes, they'll think I did it on, the child didn't know how to spell or grammar or whatever. So I turned it in. And at the end of the conference, the last day, I saw Eudora Welty speak, and it was just wonderful. And then that morning, they said, come back, and we're going to hand out the prizes. And I came back, and I won first prize, and Eudora Welty handed me the prize, and it was just, I couldn't believe it. I was at once so thrilled and horrified because I felt like I had faked them out,
Yeah.
And the story was sent to an editor in New York, and he came out and he said, I want to talk to you about your writing, and I thought, okay, and he said, what we'd like for you to do is we'd like for you to develop that short story into a novel. And I burst into tears and I said, I am so sorry. I can't do it. I can't spell.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, well, honey, why do you think we have copy editors? And I went, really?
You found your place.
And I said, I don't have to know how to spell. He said, no. He said, most writers don't do well. And I didn't know that. And so then I started writing, and then I just fell in love with it. And so then they did Fried Green Tomatoes, did the movie, and that helped me a great deal in terms of my writing career, because I got more offers to do more books, which I probably wouldn't have had they not done that movie.
Yeah.
So it was a long way around, but I finally got to what I think I'm supposed to be doing because I enjoy it so much. And I think the only downside for me is that it's so lonely, and you know that, Ernie, how sad it is to sit in a room all by yourself. So most writers, when they have to go out on a book tour, they're sad about it. I can't wait.
Yeah, you get to get out. Ever feel bad? And I know it's not totally left behind.
Yeah.
You still make appearances and such,
yeah.
but leaving that professional performer person behind.
I don't. I had a wonderful time when I was doing it, but really, I think I was so lucky because, as you know, men and women now, as you get older, you don't have much of a career. It's few and far between, and particularly for women. So I am so lucky that I have a second, how you find your second profession? I was able to find a second profession that I just adored, that I can do for the rest of my life, and when it's hard. Like if I was trying to act now, I think it'd be hard to get a job.
Well, before we get into all of the writing, I do have to ask, Match Game.
Oh, my God. Hilarious.
But something that I never thought about,
Yeah.
but when you talk about being dyslexic, Did you worry writing down your answers?
Yeah, and people used to laugh, and I pretended I did it on purpose. And it's so funny now, when I was doing Match Game, I was 30, maybe 29 or 30, or maybe even in my early 30s. And at that point, I still didn't know what was the matter with me. And I had been doing the Match Game for about a year, and a school teacher somewhere in the Midwest wrote me a letter, and she said, I noticed you're dyslexic, so-and-so. And I didn't even know what the word meant. And I looked it up, and then I went to get tested. And that was the first time I knew what it was, because we didn't know what it was. No, but it really people just thought it was you were just stupid, And so then I knew what it was, but I was embarrassed about it. Strangely enough, I didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to tell anybody. And an actor somehow found out that I was, and he called me up. And he said, Fannie, we're doing a calendar for people with dyslexia, and I want to put your name on it. And I said, I'm embarrassed about that. Please don't, blah, blah, blah. And he said, it's not for you, Fannie. It's for kids. It's to encourage other people. And I thought, okay. I was being so selfish and self-centered, thinking about, myself. So I did. And then a year or two later, I won an award from the Lab. It's LAB school in Washington, which is a big school that they have now for people with learning disabilities. And I went there, and that year they were honoring about 4 or 5 people. And Richard Avedon, the brilliant photographer, and Richard at that point was probably 75, 76, something like that. And he and I were walking down the hall of this school, and we were seeing how they were training the kids, and how they were learning so differently than we did, and they were so happy and having such fun. And he looked at me and he said, Fannie, he said, do you feel like I feel? And I said, I think so. And he said, yeah. He said, I'm so happy for these kids, and yet I'm kind of so sad I didn't have this. And he looked at me and he was so sincere. He said, he said, I've been a huge success. He said, but I still feel dumb. And that's how it affected us. And I still feel, a little bit that way.
The success of Fried Green Tomatoes, the book, did that help alleviate it? Did it say, I've arrived? Because it wasn't just a successful book. Yeah. It's a huge hit.
Huge hit,
Still continues on today.
Yeah.
When you look at that, does that at least validate all of the struggle?
I know what you're saying, and there is still, as hard as I tried, there is still a part of me that is insecure. Really? And still embarrassed. Yeah, and I wish it weren't so, but it's true. And I still feel a little less than, because I feel like if I had just been able to get a degree in English, I might have been better, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now I have friends that say, well, honey, if you had a degree in English, you might not have been able to write as simply as you do, to appeal to mass audiences, which is what I want to do. I don't want to be an academic, but
then your book is taught in schools.
I know.
I know.
It's just horrifying but thrilling at the same time. Yeah.
Seeing it turned into a film.
Yes.
How do you react to that as the parent of it? It's taken on a different life.
Totally. It was unbelievable. I'll tell you a story. I was sitting, as you know, in a room that book took a long time because nobody wanted that book. People did not want a book because I submitted it to the first publisher, and they said, no, we don't want a book about an old lady in a nursing home. We don't think that'll be, we're not interested. So I didn't get an advance. So I worked on that book just with no money, no job. And when finally they bought it, and John Avnet bought it as a movie, I was the only one that had been living with those characters. And they were filming down in Georgia. this little town in Georgia, and they were building the sets. And John called me and he said, come on down to Georgia because we'll, work on this thing, because I had written the screenplay. He said, come on down and be with us on the set. And I took a plane. It was Sunday, and the driver from Universal picked me up, and he said, do you want to stop at the set? And they're doing a little something. And I said, yeah, I'll go down there. And I walked in, and there was this street, and all of a sudden, what had been only in my mind, there was the town, and there was Sipsy and Iggy and Ruth and all these people walking down the street, and it was like I felt like I had walked inside my book. It was surreal.
And so funny. It's not just seeing it on the screen. You saw it in real life.
Yes, I saw it in real life, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And it's so funny because the people that you have in mind are not the people necessarily that other people have in mind. Because I had a specific lady, like for the older lady, Mrs. Threadgood, I had a big kind of country big bone woman, and then Jessica Tandy was little and teeny, so that was kind of hard for me because it was not the person that I saw, but now people that see the movie, that's fine,
That's who they have now.
Yeah.
We are out of time.
Well, I can't believe it. I talked your ear off. I am so sorry.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing all your stories that you have over the years, and we look forward to what you have for us next.
Well, I thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, honey.
Fannie Flagg.
To order a DVD of this or any episode of InnerVIEWS, please visit HoustonPBS.org.